So just once again, like to welcome everyone to our hashtag guidelines for honest influencing on social media. This session is going to be moderated today by Scott Guthrie, who is the director of the influencer marketing trading body. He's also a fellow member of EASA. So Scott and myself know each other very well. Thank you, Scott, for taking part today, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Orla. Thank you for the nice introduction. As Orla says, I am Scott Guthrie. I'm delighted to be here to moderate this morning's session. I head up the influencer marketing trade body. We exist to secure long-term profit for the industry. Profit over the long term will only come from professionalizing our space, sharing best practices, and championing responsible influencer marketing. So I'm delighted to support the ASA and the important work they're doing to build greater awareness around influencer marketing rules and regulations. A little bit of scene setting. Globally, our industry is worth $35 billion this year. We've grown fivefold in the last 5 years. Worldwide, influencer marketing is now more valuable than global box office takings. Influencer marketing works because it over-indexes in terms of earning consumer trust compared with all other advertising channels. However, the two greatest trust diminishers we face are influencers not being upfront with their commercial relationships with brands, and influencer marketing that makes claims consumers feel are misleading or dishonest. In fact, research done earlier this year by Snapchat and Magna shows that 9 out of 10 consumers said it's really important that creators make it known when their content is sponsored by a brand. Happily, the good news is that when influencers are upfront about brand sponsorships, consumers say their trust in that influencer rises a further 67%, and they are 63% more likely to engage with a sponsoring brand. So consumer trust then is this golden thread that is weaving its way through successful marketing and will weave its way, no doubt, through the next hour or so. Scene set. Welcome to our speakers today. Welcome again to Orla Toomey, the Chief Executive at the Advertising Standards Authority. Welcome to Mark Walsh, Head of Market Insights Unit at the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. And a big welcome to Garron Noone, content creator, comedian, musician, and podcast host. We have a crammed agenda, which I'm tasked to keep us all to time. That will mean moving us along at quite a lick. In a moment, I'm going to hand back to Orla. Orla is going to cover the key points in the ASA's influencer marketing guidance. She's going to walk us through the reporting form, what it is, and how it's been so successful. I then have a great treat in being able to chat with Garron Noone, Mr. Follow Me, I'm Delicious himself. We're going to talk about becoming an influencer, the lessons learned, the importance of transparency. I'll then hand over to Mark Walsh from the CCPC, who will then talk to us about the legal implications for brands and influencers who break consumer laws. And then we'll hand back to Orla to explain the ASA's roadmap in terms of next steps in working with influencers. Time permitting, we'll then open up to questions. We'll have around 10 minutes for questions at the end, so please do store up your questions, but save them for the end. Wow, scene set, speakers welcomed. Now it is back to Orla.
Thank you so much, Scott, and such interesting statistics that you have there about trust, and this is what it's all about. So today I am going to cover areas of the guidance in relation to labeling. So first of all, do I need to label? Which label should I use, and where do I put the label? First of all, though, we're going to do a little quiz. So I'd ask you all to have a look at these examples of influencer posts and decide in your own mind which one is correct, which one is compliant with the guidance. So I'll just give you a few seconds to have a look. Take a breath, and here we have the poll. So if everyone could answer, which one do you think is correct and compliant with the guidance that ASA and CCPC launched last year? that the poll is launched. So if everyone could vote. And do we have the results of the poll? That is very impressive. Yes, C was the correct answer. So I'm really delighted that so many of you got that correct. We obviously have some very compliant content creators on our webinar today. So moving on, do I need a label? If your content is commercial, well, then it needs to be labeled as such. And there are a number of different ways to do it, which I'll come on to. But being commercial can be a lot of things. It can be that you've been given a trip away and part of that is you have to post about it. Well, there's a commercial element to that. You're receiving a benefit. If you have received a discount code, well, then for your followers, for your audience, you are acting as a trader. In that case, you are giving a benefit to your audience. It is commercial. If you have a long-term relationship with a brand, your brand ambassador, they sponsor you, well, then the content you create about their product or their service is commercial. And you must always disclose every time you mention that brand or that company or that service. These are just examples. I would encourage everyone to look at the guidance because there's more examples there. It's not an exhaustive list. I think what we would say is think about what you are posting and think about, would a reasonable person consider that there's a commercial element to it? We have tools on our website to help people determine whether or not content is commercial. There is a very nice question and answer tool on the website which will lead you through the various scenarios. There's also the flowchart in the guidance, and I'd encourage you to download that as well. These will help you determine whether particular content is commercial, and if it is, what type of label is needed for that. What label to use? This is very, very straightforward. If the content is commercial, you must include at least one of the primary labels. And it must be at the start of the content and it must be clearly visible. So either #ad, #gifted, or the platform provided label. You may also use a secondary label, but it must come after the primary label. You don't have to use the secondary label, but if you want to, you can use it because it can give more information about the type of relationship you have. So for example, #ad, #own brand when you are promoting your own brand, or #ad, #brand ambassador. So you're making it clear that it's an ad, but your relationship is that of a brand ambassador. So again, you must include at least one of the primary labels and they must be clear. So then we look at where to put the label, and this is something that we're seeing that there's a bit of a challenge with. It must be at the beginning. So you'll see in this example here on the left, #ad is at the beginning of the text block. It can't be obscured by the profile picture or the social media platform features. And that's why it'd be important once you have posted content that you check that it's not obscured, that it is clear. So it might be clear when you take your photograph, when you create it, but when you actually post it, it could be obscured. So it's really important that it's not. You can use, obviously, as we said, the platform provided label, but again, that must be clear and must be always clear. And if it is expiring media, then it must be, the label must be on each post. You can't just put it at the beginning or just at the end. It has to be available all the way through. So we've created a number of examples, and these are all based on actual content, but we've anonymized them so that you can, we're not calling anyone out. In this particular example here, you will see on the bottom right-hand corner in very faint text, there's the word ad. This is not compliant because first of all, the #ad should be at the beginning of the text block. It's not clear enough and there is no hashtag. So every time you post, you must have a primary label that has the hashtag, either #ad, #gifted, or the paid partnership. In this example, there's no primary label, and the label is not at the start of the content. In this example, there is no primary label, there's no platform provided label. And in this example, again, there's no primary label and there's an incorrect label. So we have linked AF. AF is not a correct label. It's hashtag affiliate, but also it has to have hashtag ad at the very beginning of the content. And in the final example, again, there's no primary label. And the label needs to be on all commercial posts and stories. So if this was a story, an expiring media, it needs to be on every single post. So we wanted to show you some real examples because these are based on real examples. So you can see the type of content that we are seeing that's not compliant and how simple it would actually be to actually bring it into compliance. Very, very straightforward. Hashtag ad, hashtag gifted, or the platform provided label. Scott mentioned our notifications. When we introduced, shortly after we introduced the guidance with the CCPC, we set up a notification form that people could actually tell us about the type of content they were seeing that they were concerned about. We've had thousands of notifications since then, and 98% of them do relate to Instagram, posts on Instagram. And the overwhelming reason for complaint is that it was missing a label or a hashtag. We did do a little bit of analysis to see what type of content was being posted about that was causing the problem. And you can see there that the main categories, this was on a subset of the data that we looked at, were clothing, cosmetics, food and drink, and skincare. So these are obviously areas that Irish consumers are following content creators in these areas. They're very interested in these areas, but they're having a problem because content creators are not creating the content with commercial content with the appropriate disclosure. And one of the things that we have seen is that in some cases, in quite a lot of cases, content creators are using versions of the labels, but they're not using them correctly and they're not using them consistently. So for example, in one case, we had AF space AD, collab, hashtag ad at the bottom of the text, ad, brand ambassador, BA. In another, we had ADAF, ad product collab, ad founder, ad brand ambassador. So what I would say is these are not correct. You have to say hashtag ad. It's not enough to say ad on its own. You have to have the hashtag in front of ad. The hashtag ad or the hashtag gifted has to be at the start of the content. You can't put the secondary label hashtag affiliate before hashtag ad. It has to be the other way around. Hashtag ad, hashtag affiliate. So I would encourage everybody to look at the flow chart in the guidance, to look at the tool that we've created on our website adstandards.ie and familiarize yourself with these three simple primary labels: hashtag ad, hashtag gifted, and the paid partnership or the other tool provided by the platform. So that's what I wanted to cover at this particular point. So I'll hand back to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Orla. Really helpful statistics, obviously from an Irish point of view, but it chimes very neatly with what we're seeing in the UK as well. Anecdotally, the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK says that 95% of complaints around influencers and influencer marketing is around missed or no ad markings as well. So it's a similar story in the UK as well. Well, Orla, thank you. I now have the great pleasure of spending the next 20 minutes or so speaking with Garron Noone, content creator, comedian, musician, named one of Ireland's breakthrough stars for 2023 on TikTok. Mr. Follow Me, I'm Delicious himself. A warm welcome, Garron. Hello there,
Hello,
how
how you
are
doing?
you?
I feel great about myself after that introduction. Thanks a million.
Trying to be a hype man, not that you need it at all. As they say on local radio, long time listener, first time caller. Delighted to be able to chat with you for the next 20 minutes or so. So let's get straight into it. So you've been posting for a few years, but did you have a mission to begin with? Was there an overall goal when you started out, or were you just uploading content for fun?
No, so the way I started off was I had an Instagram page and it was for just like little guitar bits I had come up with. So I had maybe 10,000 followers on that page. And I used to post stories just like if I was having a meal somewhere or something, and I'd do a review of it, and people are like, "Oh, you know, you should put these reviews on TikTok or wherever." And the main reason that I started making videos was because, like putting videos on TikTok and stuff, is because I thought that the videos would annoy people. So I started putting stuff on TikTok then, and then I realized that on TikTok you could get a few more views. So I decided, okay, well, I might just make a video every day. So then I set a goal to make a video every day. I didn't really know it would. I say I didn't know people made money for it. I didn't know about any of this sort of stuff. So I just kept posting, and then sort of grew my following over time. And it was very unintentional, completely accidental how I got into it. But it's great, yeah.
Well, you've kind of preempted my next question, which was neat. But at the risk of sort of going all X Factor on you, talk me through your journey. How did you get from posting about music to being named a breakthrough star in 2023 to doing brand collaborations, fronting a podcast, and going on tour? You said it started off organically, but how did it gather momentum?
Yeah, so I started the first few videos that I posted on TikTok were I had done some cereal reviews. So somebody sent me like 4 boxes of cereal, and I reviewed them, and people liked the cereal reviews on Instagram. So I said, okay, I'm going to move these over to TikTok. People started sending me cereal, so made a few of them. They didn't like get a lot of views or anything. It was really just my friends. And then because people enjoyed them, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try and come up with some other stuff to make videos about. So then I started doing tier lists where I rank different foods. So ranking all the ice creams and the crisps. And I think maybe the second or third one of those I did, it got like maybe 30 or 40,000 views. And at the time I thought I was the biggest star in the world when I said them numbers. So I decided then that I was just going to post every day. If I just kept annoying people with videos, then people would probably see, every 50th one or something like that. So I started posting every day, and there were videos that were kind of, do a lot more views over time, but it was quite a gradual process for me. And then maybe every month, 2 months, I'd maybe get a video that got like 1 million views or something like that. But over the course of about 2 years, I kind of steadily grew my following and took stuff on sort of slowly. I only started doing the podcast recently, started doing the shows about maybe 8 months ago, something like that. So it was very slow, and I don't think I was probably doing it for a year before I did any collaborations or anything like that. And I really only started to make it my full-time living maybe in the last 6 months. Before that, it was mainly other stuff that I was doing. So yeah, so it was very, very gradual for me.
So we'll come on to brand collabs in a moment, but you said that some of the content really erupted, and some of it didn't. Did you make a conscious effort to tailor future content based on views, or did you just want to carry on posting how you felt? Were you listening to the community and the algorithm, or were you just posting what you felt?
Yeah, so no, I'm not just posting what I feel like posting now. At first, definitely. At first I was just doing it for fun. And I think maybe when I got to maybe like 10 or 20,000 followers, I started to realize that, certain videos were doing better than others, and that there may be some potential to keep growing it. And I didn't know what it could be at that point, but I thought it was worth doing. So then I have a big long note in my notes on my iPhone, not sponsored. Uh, so I have a big long note there where I took notes of like, okay, the first 3 seconds are the most important. So I need to say something really impactful at the start. It's good if I have text on screen that says something else. So it's good if I have something in the background so that I'm saying the most in the first 3 seconds. Because really, to catch people, you kind of have this time window as long as it takes them to scroll on to the next thing with short form. So I took a lot of notes about that, what was effective, what wasn't, the sort of topics that were effective. And the way that I kind of work it is I still do videos more or less every day. So I try and do videos that are maybe like 4 days a week, 5 days a week. It's a fairly safe one that I know people will watch. And then maybe 2 days a week, I try and do something a bit weird to see if that works. But I'm always experimenting. I'm always sort of making little notes of things that work and stuff like that. And so far, that seems to have given me a consistent growth. So it seems to have worked quite well.
And how did your catchphrase come? Well, that's a beautiful answer, thank you. But how did your catchphrase come about? Was it by design? Was it accidental? Follow me, I'm
Yeah,
delicious. Where did that come from?
it was actually a result of my own inability to make good videos. So I made a commitment that I was going to make videos every day once I started to see a bit of traction. And then basically some days I would make videos that were completely pointless. Like it would be about a topic nobody cared about. The videos weren't funny. There was nothing interesting in the video. So one day I made a video and I was like, oh, I don't even know if I can post this, but I said I was going to post every day, so I'm going to put it up. So I said, do you know what I'll do? I'll just say something really random at the end. So I go, follow me, I'm delicious. And my plan was I was going to say something different every video.
Uh,
But after that video, if I didn't say it, people commented, oh, why didn't you say follow me, I'm delicious? So it was kind of the people that were watching that decided it was a catchphrase. I didn't know it was going to be when I said it. And yeah, that's how it came about. It's been very good branding in the end.
and
So I got lucky with that.
well, there's always some science behind the getting lucky. Uh, it sounds like you said you recently been sort of full time, but has there been is it all been upside to you becoming more famous? Any sort of steep learning curves along the way? I'm not suggesting, I'm not trying to color the question, but has it all been gravy, or have there been any sort of curveballs along the way?
It's been reasonably positive for me in terms of like dealing with how people have received me. There's negative stuff from time to time. That just comes along with, the more people that are seeing your stuff, the more negativity you're going to get. People are doing things for their own reasons. People are going to say things to either to entertain themselves, to be funny, or because they have some feeling about something else that might not even have anything got to do with you. So I think one of the things that and probably one of the most important things, it's easy to focus on the negative stuff and say, okay, I need to ignore that. But another thing that's important is also to ignore too much of the positive as well. Your people are getting a sort of a minute long window of you, and they might like the video and they might say something very positive, but it's also not healthy to continuously read good comments about yourself or bad comments about yourself, because you're just filling your head with people's thoughts about you, which may sound like a good thing if they're good, but if you get too reliant on that and then they switch, then you're going to have a problem. So I think the best thing to do is to be sort of active with your audience. For me, anyway, is to be active with your audience, but to also disengage from it as much as you can, and not put. I think because it's your personality, and for a lot of people, it can end up being their job. Your whole identity gets placed around this thing that you're doing on the internet, and I think that's very unhealthy. So you have to make sure to not do that too much. So now I'm on my phone, I think, less than most people, and it helps me with that. But it's definitely something to be careful of, I think.
Well, that leads us neatly, Garron, to another couple of questions, and the more commercial side. You said that you've been full time, but only in the last 6 months. How have you found working with brands and producing sponsored content? Does that take you away sort of from the essence of you, or or how do you select the potential brands to do a collaboration with? Do you have an internal checklist? Is what I suppose I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so there's a balance to be struck there. You want most of your content to be stuff that's entertaining to people, and people do have a certain negative disposition towards ads, whether they're entertaining or on brand for you or not. People don't like to see you doing too many ads. So I'm always sort of thinking when I'm choosing a brand, I want it to be aligned with me. I want the content to be as entertaining as possible, but as similar to the stuff that people followed for as possible. I like to work with brands that are allowing me to do my own thing. So, if a brand is coming along and they're giving me all sorts of constraints about what I need to say, that generally doesn't work for me, because then all of a sudden you're coming out with this video and it just doesn't sound like you at all, and people are like, okay, what's this? If you're the more similar it seems to your regular videos, the less you have to change, the better. I think it matters, that you like the brand, that it's aligned. But other than that, I'm not against working with anybody as long as I like the product and they're not trying to make me change too much. Generally, they'll just tell me not to curse, because I have a tendency to curse in my video.
As I say, I'm a great fan, but yeah, it's a wide lexicon. Let's put it that way. So to sum up that question, then it's about finding a brand that shares the same values and worldviews and behaviors as yourself, aligned with the sort of content that you don't want to be bombarding with your community with sponsored ads. So I'm guessing longer relationships with the same brand as well would kind of work. So it's a similar vein. And then working with a brand that gives you guide rails, but not a straight jacket in terms of hold up the shampoo bottle and say, I love the shampoo in the first 3 seconds. It's allowing you to get the best of you because you know your community. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to summarize what you've just said, Garron.
Yeah, that's basically it. Like again, I don't mind stuff like even having the brand there in the first few seconds. If that's important to them, that's fine with me. And I don't mind as well because I like to make it as obvious as possible that it's an ad. So some of the ads will go, "Hello, I'm doing an advertisement for these people." So I don't really mind about that. It's more so that I can have my authentic humor in it, that it's not being written by somebody else, that it doesn't sound awkward, and that I like the brand. That's all I really care about, and that I'm not doing too many.
So you have a responsibility. Well, do you have it? I don't want to put words in your mouth again, Garron, but do you feel a sense of responsibility to your community? You've said that you don't want to be bombarding them, and actually bombardment is number 2 in terms of big turnoffs in terms of influencer marketing or advertising in general. So do you feel you have a sense of responsibility when posting online? And if so, where is that responsibility, and how do you feel it?
Yeah, so I feel like I have a responsibility, first of all, to look into the brand, and make sure that there's, I'm not putting my name behind something that's negative in all sorts of ways that it can be negative, but you've got to do that yourself.
Mm.
I am fairly careful about what I will say in an ad. So, for instance, there's a lot of things I just won't say. So, I don't like saying the price is only this amount. I don't like saying things like this is my favorite this.
Yeah.
I want it ultimately to be truthful. So generally, if they will send me stuff like, "Oh, could you say this?" and it's not the actual truth, I won't say it because I think people can tell. Especially if you're over a long period of time, if you're doing 1 or 2 ads, maybe you can get away with saying this is my favorite this. But if you're advertising 14 packets of crisps and they're all your absolute favorite crisp, people are going to catch on that you're not being particularly authentic.
There's only so good Tay-Tays can be. Yeah. But also it's self-preservation, presumably. You've been making money out of this for 6 months. Presumably, this is a long-term career aspiration. So it's about staying true to yourself, growing that community, and not sort of have any. You've mentioned fleetingly sort of negative comments that you sometimes get, but it's about, I suppose, minimizing those, but by staying true to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like ultimately, my goal is to sustain my ability to be able to do this, and to get more opportunities and be able to keep myself in it. So, yeah, there's the financial element, which is doing an ad and bringing in money to do that. But also, I mean, if you, in the process of doing that, turn everybody off you, then you don't get to do it either. So there's a balancing act of, you know, respecting your audience and entertaining them, and then also making money, which is fine. I think a lot of people want to go, "Oh, I don't care about the money." I think it's fine to care about the money, but there's got to be a balancing act, and you've got
Yeah.
to respect the people that are watching you, both their intelligence and their time. So
And if you don't have the money, then you can't produce the content. It's as simple as that. So there does have to be that, that. And I think consumers today are nuanced enough to understand that there's this trade-off between having content for free in essence, and there being some sort of an understanding that there is sometimes a financial incentive for their favorite creator to earn
yeah,
money, whether that is through a sponsored ad or through through whatever subscriptions or whatever. So is there anything that Garron Noone cannot do? We've talked about comedian, musician. We've talked about new podcast. What's next? We've talked about the last 6 months. What's the next few years look like for you?
yeah. I suppose again, like a lot of people, I think I've kind of randomly ended up doing this. So I didn't have a game plan when I started, and now my plan really is to try and continue what I'm doing, do more of the same, kind of be a better version of what I'm doing now. So make the content better, make the podcast better, and try and stay doing it as much as I can. I mean, it's a tremendous opportunity to be able to try and entertain people for a living. So as long as I can sustain that, I'm happy. So I'd be quite happy if it just stayed as it was for the next 2 or 3 years. I'd be thrilled with that.
So you're known really for short content, short form content. The podcast is obviously longer. So are there different techniques, or are you learning different skills, or is it just sitting down and having a chat with someone? Is there a different set that you have to skill up on?
Yeah, there's a learning curve to everything. I got fairly decent at the short form thing, but like I think people think that that's natural. I think there's a tendency to think that these things come naturally to people, and they really don't. It's just repetition. Like if you go and look at my pages, there's there's 1,000 videos up, so that's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of data collection, and I'm moving into long form stuff now. I am working with traditional media on things as well. I do, some radio stuff, some television stuff like that. But ultimately, it is about repeating stuff and collecting data. So I kind of intend to do the exact same thing now with the podcast, with the long form content, and the skill set that I've learned. I think short form is a great way to get into everything, because you sort of get to accelerate that process of learning the skill of how to get people to watch something. So I'm going to try and apply that to other forms of stuff now.
Well, it's obviously working for you, Garron. I could talk to you all morning. As I said, the agenda is we've got a packed agenda. Going to move on at quite a lick. But you've been generous enough to say you're hanging around for the Q&A session at the end. So if anyone on the webinar today has some questions, then fire away on the Q&A section. But for now, Garron, thank you very much for having a chat.
Thanks a million. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, that was really, really super to catch up with Garron now. And I'm now very pleased to hand over to Mark Walsh, Head of Market Insights Unit at the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, to talk about legal implications for brands and influencers who break consumer laws. And then Mark will also talk about data sharing. So thank you very much. And over to you, Mark.
Thanks a million, Scott. Appreciate that. And thanks to the ASA for inviting us along and for all the collaboration that we've had on the guidance so far. I think it's been a great year since we launched. So just, I suppose, to kick off by saying that while I'll go through the kind of legal requirements, we believe that compliance has universal benefits, that it benefits everybody. It benefits the brands that are working with influencers. It benefits influencers themselves in terms of their authenticity and their trustworthiness. And then obviously, ultimately, what we're most interested in is it benefits consumers in terms of having transparent information and access to information that they can trust and believe in when they're interacting with advertising on social media. So the guidance was written from the point of view of the legal obligations that traders have, and influencers and brands are both traders in this area when they are advertising. And there is a legal obligation not to mislead consumers. So in an Irish context, what we work under is the Consumer Protection Act, and there's specific provisions within that. And then in the European context, there's also the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. So internationally and within Ireland, there are always legal obligations not to mislead. Within that, commercial posts have to be instantly and obviously recognizable. So I think the guidance talks about being clear, prominent, honest, and instantly recognizable to consumers. So the minute they click on it, they should be able to know, or interact with it, I suppose, if it's not engagement. They should be able to know that they are looking at marketing content, that commercial content. The way we observe that is we do conduct sweeps. So around this time last year, there was a sweep that was actually conducted across the European Union, and we engaged with that. We also conduct monitoring on an ongoing basis and on maybe a needs basis, depending on information that we receive. And in March this year, 26 letters were sent to influencers, 18 to agents of influencers also, based on the results of a previous sweep. And that was to, I suppose, remind them of their obligations under the Act. We are also in the process of finalizing a data sharing agreement with the ASA. So the ASA have been doing great work in terms of collecting anonymous reporting from consumers or anyone who engages with advertising. And they've been following up on that separately, but now there will be a data sharing agreement to ensure that we can receive some information, I suppose, for some of the more repeat people that may be reported to them. They'll be able to share those across, and we'll be able to take appropriate action. So if an influencer has engaged in something that may breach the Act, we have a range of enforcement tools that will be open to us. And it's kind of dependent on a case-by-case basis, but they can include compliance notices. They can include, actually, they can start with, I suppose, notification letters as we sent out, just to make people aware again of their obligations. Then there's compliant notices. We have fixed payment notices. We can seek undertakings from them. And then there's prohibition orders and prosecutions that can ultimately be taken. So it can basically go from a letter, an engagement letter, to a court procedure and an actual finding of criminality. And there can be fines associated with that. And we have seen those internationally. There are a lot of cases that have been taken, particularly across the EU, but in other territories as well. And I think one of the key things, aside from the financial impact, I suppose, of the fines, is also the damage to an influencer's reputation. I'm sure everybody on this call is aware that the name is the brand, essentially, and the trustworthiness and the authenticity of that is crucial to the success of any influencer. So even just being named in association with these things can be quite detrimental. And again, there's international evidence for that also. The one thing I would say as well is that, just before I finish up and hand back, there are other obligations. It's not just about labeling. Influencers have a range of obligations, and particularly if you are advertising your own brand or your own company, there can be additional obligations over and above what might be placed on you if you're just advertising for another brand. So influencers and the brands that they work with do have to be aware of all those laws. They do have to adhere to them, both in competition context and in consumer protection context. So just two that stand out would be the Consumer Rights Act and the Consumer Protection Act. But if anyone wants more information on that, we do have a business section on our website on ccpc.ie. You can get far more information there, or you can contact us directly. There is a helpline as well that you can seek more information from. So that's probably enough of the heavy stuff for the moment, but obviously happy to stay on for a Q&A as well. And I know I can see some of the questions coming up. There are specific things that are being brought up there, and we can delve into some of those, I'm sure, in the Q&A shortly.
Well, Mark, it's always a tough gig to come straight after chatting with Garron. So thank you very much. It was a hard ask, but really important stuff and really interesting as well, and puts it into wider context about the rules and regulations. Ultimately, of course, to protect the consumer, but also to make sure that we understand that it's not just the influencers that are culpable, but also the agencies and the brands as well. So thank you very much, Mark. And now back to Orla. Orla, you're going to explain some more about the Advertising Standards Authority's roadmap in terms of next steps in working with influencers. So take it away, Orla.
Thanks so much, Scott, and absolutely thanks to Mark and Garron. Very good insights there as well. So yeah, so what are we going to be doing next? So I mentioned earlier our notification form. We have been analysing that content that we've got in. It has related to about 800 content creators have been notified through the form. And in 50% of those, there was only one notification. So obviously we would have considered, well, that was an error happened. It's not something that they continually do. But in about 50%, there are multiple notifications. And in some cases, some influencers have, I would say multiple notifications. So we have been writing to influencers, content creators. We've been pointing out what the guidance requires, and we've been looking for compliance. I think over the course of the last while, we've written to about 150 influencers. So we certainly will, one of our next steps will be to ramp up our adjudications in this area. We feel at this stage, the guidance has been in place for a year. It is not complicated. It's quite straightforward. It's easy to comply with. And we think at this stage that, it's important that we show, I suppose we show audiences like, these are the influencers that are not being honest with you about when they're advertising, so that people are aware of that. Though I would say, I think audiences are very clear themselves. If something, if it smells a bit off, they know that there's something a bit off with that. But apart from that, We're also going to look to work with brands so that we can encourage advertisers and brands and companies to only work with influencers that clearly follow the rules, because there's a reputation piece here. It's been mentioned a few times. There's a reputation piece for the influencers. It's your reputation if you are not going to be honest with your audience, but there's also a reputation piece for advertisers and brands. Their reputation is damaged when they're seen to be working with influencers who are not honest and transparent in what they do. So we'll be looking to work with brands to that they'll only work with influencers who are consistently disclosing properly. We'll also look to see what training we can provide to influencers. We've got some ideas on that because we think that would be helpful. We want to enable influencers, content creators, to actually be able to create with confidence, knowing that they're transparent and they're honest, and what they say in their posts is decent, honest, and truthful. We're also going to be looking at what tech tools on social media we can use. So, I mean, obviously our influencer reporting form is really helpful. It's giving us access to content which we can look at some scale, but we want to do more. We want to see what tech tools are out there that we can do. And this is something they've done in other European jurisdictions. So both looking at how machine learning and AI might be able to help us in this, but this is something that we'll talk about at a later stage. So I think the key thing is that we are going to continue working in this area. We're going to continue working with CCPC. Mark mentioned the data sharing agreement. It is an opportunity to give over quite a large amount of data so that we can be analysed and see where is the real harm, where is the harm happening, who are the influencers who are actually not being, either through lack of care or because they don't understand the importance to their audience, to themselves, and to the brand of actually being consistent in how they actually disclose. And I would just remind once again, it is #ad, #gifted, or use the tool that is provided by the platform. So I think that's essentially what I wanted to say on the next steps. Moving on to our earlier test the knowledge. So obviously the correct answer was C. There were some questions as to why the other two weren't correct. So I'm just going to quickly go through that. So A was not correct because it did not have #ad at the beginning of the text block. While it did say here linked AFAD, AFAD is not a correct label. If it's an ad, it must be #ad and it must be at the beginning of the text block. And if it's AF, it's #affiliate. So that was the problem in that particular post. Again, in this one as well, a similar problem. It did say linked AF, but that's not a correct label. It did not say #ad, and the #ad should have been at the beginning. And C was correct because it said #ad at the beginning of the text block. So I think that was just wanted to say that to clarify what, with those examples, why A and B were not correct, not compliant with the guidance, and why C was correct with the guidance. And I'll hand back to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Orla. Lots of interesting stuff there, as always, as ever. Reputation, influencers, and brands, that is a common thread that's woven its way through today, along with the importance of trust. And I guess, if an influencer or a brand is seeking to mislead an audience about whether a piece of content is organic or sponsored, so there's a question mark that lingers. What else might they be misleading? If they're misleading over of the content, what else might they be misleading on in terms of the products they're creating as well? Orla, you mentioned before we go to the Q&A, we're going to open up that in a very second. One is a very simple question about logistics. Will there be a copy of the slides and the recording available after today?
The recording will be available on our website, yes.
Perfect. That's an easy one to tick off. Thank you very much. The other one, you talked about repeat offenders, and you said you'd written to 150 influencers, reminding them of the guidance. The guidance is now celebrating its first anniversary. What happens next? What happens to those repeat offenders?
If we don't have a clear indication of, and we've already started adjudicating again on this, if we don't have a clear indication of compliance, and if it's not clear to us that their content is consistently compliant, we will be bringing these cases to our complaints committee for adjudication. And again, it's that we do use the name and shame sanction. So when we publish, we name the brand and the influencer that is involved. And we know from our experience that these are things that are picked up by media. There's a lot of interest in influencer marketing. So it's not really, I don't think it's a good place where any influencer, any content creator wants to be a headline saying that they have misled because they didn't disclose advertising content. But one of the other areas that we're going to look at and see, is there any other enhanced notification or sanctions that we can use? We think it's really simple to actually disclose. It isn't rocket science. It is a simple thing to do. And people do make mistakes. We know that. But when you consistently see incorrect disclosure, you have to question, is it a mistake or is it deliberate? And so at this stage, we will continue with our name and shame sanction, and we will examine if there's anything else we can do, and we will be sharing data with the CCPC. And as Mark has said, they have got tiered sanctions that they can take. And so I just again encourage everybody, pause before you post and make sure you've disclosed.
Well, I like that. That's a great soundbite. Not quite as "follow me, I'm delicious," but
No.
it's a good one. Pause before you post. I like that also. And that brings up another question that was asked about the penalties for not using the correct labeling. You've covered that beautifully. You all write to them. You have the sanctions. It's name and shame. But ultimately, you'll hand it over to Mark, and he'll get tough with the sanctions at his disposal. Lots of questions coming in. Here's one for you, Garron. What advice would you have for smaller brands looking to partner with creators? How can smaller brands compete with larger brands in terms of working? I know obviously there'll be a financial part of the transaction, but is there any way that smaller brands can work with creators today?
Yeah, so if you're looking at like somebody who's a bigger creator, you have to understand that they're probably getting a huge amount of inquiries. So if you send them a message, you're probably not going to get through to them. The best way to get through to somebody who's a bigger creator, I think, is if you're at an event that they're at or something like that, make a personal connection and try not to compete on the financial grounds, because you're probably not going to be able to compete with a bigger company. And the reality is that somebody doesn't want to post too many ads, so they're going to try and maximize to some extent the money they're getting. I think what really makes a difference with smaller brands is getting in with somebody personally, making a personal connection, telling them the story of your brand. And it's worked a few times, and I've posted stuff for free. I can't do it all the time, but people will promote you if they like what you're doing. That would be my advice.
Thank you, Garron. So that goes back to your earlier answer about alignment in terms of values and product alignment and worldview and behaviours and those sorts of important things. Sticking with you for a second, just to give all a bit of a breather. But how do you manage all the requests that you've been live? Well, not live, but you've been full time for 6 months. Presumably lots of requests coming in. How do you manage that? Do you have an assistant? Do you have a manager? Do you do it all yourself? How do you manage that process?
Yeah, so I am with an agency now, so they field pretty much everything for me. So if somebody wants to contact me, they get in contact with my agency, and then my agency will kind of have the conversations with them and then bring stuff to me. It is at the point now where I wouldn't be able to do it myself. I can't really look at all the messages. So that's basically it. They do most of the administration stuff, and then I focus on the sort of creative side of things and all that.
Perfect. Thank you, Garron. What allows you to get on with what you so good at achieving. Let the boring stuff be handled by other people. Orla, here's this. We're talking today about influencer marketing, working with a creator like Garron to create sponsored content on your behalf. Well, here's a question that's coming from a small business. They said, we post our own content. We rarely work with influencers, but should they have to use #ad when they post to their own profiles?
I think from our point of view, the question is it going to be clear to the viewers, audience, that this is commercial content? So if it's a commercial company and it is their own commercial brand page, we would consider that, generally speaking, people would understand that anything that they are posting is an ad. If they're talking about their product and service, it is an ad. I mean, we would sometimes in the past have had an argument made to us, well, you know, it's not an ad because it's not a paid for ad. If it's because, and it's organic. Well, no, if you're posting about your own brand on your brand page, we feel that consumers will understand that you're promoting your products and services, that it's advertising. And they might necessarily call it advertising, but they know that it's promoting your products and services, and that's the nature of it. It's not an organic piece of content that has something slid into it that is an ad. So it does depend on, is it your own brand page? It's for your own website. If you've got a website and you're promoting your products and services on your website, we feel people will understand that they're being advertised to, and I think that's the key thing. Do people understand they are being promoted to? If that content appears somewhere else and it's not clear, then yeah, you'd have to disclose. So for example, if I take an example from traditional media, and newspapers would sometimes run what's called advertorials. So the advertorial is written ultimate control by the advertiser, and it's a trade-off. The advertorial appears as editorial material, and the advertiser might take out a paid ad. That advertorial has to clearly say that it's advertorial, it's an advertisement feature, because it looks like editorial in a place where you expect editorial material, and yet it's not editorial. So it does depend on the context and where your information is appearing. But if it's your own social media brand page, we think people will understand it's advertising.
Is it obviously identifiable as an ad? We've got a couple of questions on a similar vein. I'm going to stick with you, Orla. This one is about who is responsible, who is culpable. We've heard from the expert, the creator himself, but is it just the influencer who is culpable? If an influencer doesn't clearly mark out when an ad, is he or she solely to blame, or is it the agency and the brand, the ultimate advertiser as well? Is everyone in the chain culpable for that?
Everybody in the advertising ecosystem has a responsibility to ensure that content complies with the ASA code, and obviously also with any consumer protection legislation that is there. So our view is that an advertiser, the brand, has ultimate responsibility for ensuring that the content that they cause to be created is compliant with the code. But obviously the influencer is the one who's the content creator is the one who's creating the content. So they have a responsibility to ensure that they create content that is compliant, that discloses properly. And I think it was interesting, what Garron was saying earlier about, creating content that allows him to have his own authentic voice and not be like straitjacketed by the brands. I mean, I think sometimes brands might want to straitjacket influencers, and I don't think we wouldn't have a view that, the brand should script out what the influencer is saying. But what the brand should be saying is, we want you to create content. We expect that the content will comply with the requirements for disclosure. And the brand should be checking that the content does comply with the disclosure requirements. The influencer, the content creator, if they're being asked to make any product claims or product efficacy claims, they don't have to go and prove that themselves, but they should be asking the brand, do you have the evidence for that? Because the brand has to have evidence for any efficacy claims for their product that they make. So it's not a case of that there's a silo over here, there's a silo over here. It is a collaborative process, and all of those involved in that process have an onus on them to make sure that the content that is ultimately created complies with the code and with the legislation.
Thank you very much, Orla. Here's a question for you, Mark. Just to check in, see if you're still there. Really keen. Orla's beautifully articulated the process for the guidance, writing to repeat offenders. But could you just remind us of the ladder of sanctions at your disposal at the CPCC to ultimately to what the ultimate, I suppose, backstop to protect the consumer against influencers that don't declare ads as ads?
Yeah, so it kind of goes through different levels, and it can depend on a case-by-case basis. It's not necessarily the case that, you know, each individual instance will go through exactly the same path. It obviously depends on the severity and potentially the intent and things like that, that Orla has spoken about as well. You know, if it's a genuine error, that will have a different path to something that seems a little bit more malicious potentially when we go through. But it would generally be something along the lines of maybe an engagement to remind them of their obligations and to, I suppose, notify them that, you know, we're paying more attention maybe to them than to even the general kind of ecosystem that they are being watched specifically. And then from there, it can progress, again, depending on the action that's taken by the influencer themselves, but it could progress to a court proceeding. And it can result in fines. There have been across Europe. There are instances where both influencers and brands have been taken to court, and the fines have ranged. I think some of the highest ones were maybe in Sweden. There was one that was $250,000, I think, between the brand and the influencer. So it does. I suppose it's not necessarily helpful to say it varies case by case, but it really does. It does depend on the level of detriment that can be there and the intent that potentially is behind it, and a number of other factors as well. And I think, as we said earlier as well, it's not just the tagging element. And I think you spoke to it yourself, Scott, that there can be other elements of a post, and sometimes they can be tied in as well. That it's not just that it wasn't tagged, but there may also be additional content. And that may raise the severity as well then onto it. So yeah, it can vary, but there are fines there. It is open to us to seek those and to enforce them. So yeah, it can be quite severe depending on the instance.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was grand. Garron, here's one for you. I think we've touched on it before, but how do you go about, or maybe your agency handles it on your behalf, but how do you go about responding to a brand that doesn't quite align with your with your worldview or with your values? How do you work with them or not work with them?
Yeah, so the agency will handle pretty much all of that now, but it does come up from time to time. Particularly, I might meet people at events and stuff who'll ask me to do stuff. And to be honest with you, I just tell them outright. People are fairly receptive to stuff. I've been asked to do like supplements. I don't want to get into that world. I don't know anything about it, so I just say, look, I don't want to do that. I've been asked to do products that are aimed at children, and I just said, look, I don't advertise to children. I'm not willing to do that. And people are fine with it. People understand that you know, they have a business to run, you have a business to run, and they don't tend to be too negative about it.
Yeah, I love that. It's a simple code to live by. Let's have a look here. Lots of questions in. I'm just trying to scroll because some of them we've already touched on, which is good. Yeah. Orla, here's one for you. That you and you've mentioned it before, but I think it's worth clarifying. And it's about Instagram stories and sort of episodic or fleeting content. When should or how much should those stories or carousels be marked as ads?
Every single piece of it has
Just
to
say
be
that.
marked.
Just say that again, Orla.
Every single piece of it has to be marked as an ad, because if you are with media that has the potential to expire, it doesn't do so all at one go. So I could theoretically come into something and the first part of it is gone and I don't see the disclosure. So every single part of that post story has to have the hashtag ad or hashtag gifted, if that's the actual on it. And the idea is that at every point that it's possibly viewable, someone will see that it is actually commercial content. And this is a long-standing position even prior to the guidance. This is on the basis of adjudication from the Complaints Committee.
Thank you. Understood. I thought it's worth really underscoring that point. We've got a question here about naming and shaming. It's more of an observation, but I'm keen to hear different points of view on this. It says, regards name and shaming, agree the influencers need to be called out. However, when it comes to brands, this person is 50% kind of uncertain about whether that's the right way forward. Some cases, the brands provide all the correct information, all the right appropriate guidance, and the influencer still disregards that, and they just post what they want. So should brands be penalised, I suppose, when sometimes influencers just do their own thing and are unruly? Their words, not mine, Garron.
Generally speaking, if you're working with a brand, they have to approve everything that you do, and they are pretty serious about. They are pretty serious. Like all of the brands I've worked with are very serious about compliance. So if I send something through and it doesn't have the proper hashtags and stuff in it, it will get rejected straight away. Now where you might run into issues is with smaller brands when people are starting off. There's like this real gray area where you don't really understand what you're doing, and I don't think it's really fair to penalize people who are in that position, because I was there. I didn't understand, what I was meant to put, what ad it was meant to be. And I think the best way is for them to be let known about that. And obviously, anything that has to be done if they're not. But for the most part, I don't think it should be that much of an issue, because all of the brands that I see are very serious about it. So I can't imagine how it will come up. But I think it's fair to penalize people, and maybe to name and shame them, because a lot of it, I think, has got to be deliberate at some point. There's a difference between putting hashtag ad at the wrong part of something or something like that, and just trying to hide that something is an ad. And a lot of the time, I think it's probably on purpose. And those people, I think it's fair, that they should be named for that.
And maybe, Scott, if I could jump in on that. So, I mean, like, obviously we have been taking an approach of, inform first and then, step it up. But in relation to brands as well. So if a brand has caused content to be created, and if they have a contract, that contract can be like, a very formal written contract, or it is a verbal contract. They have an agreement with a content creator and influencer to create content. The brand has an obligation to make sure that the content is created is correct. So if the influencer has gone rogue, gone off the reservation and done what they want, well, then the brand has an obligation to have a conversation with them and say, correct it or take it down. And there is a commercial relationship there. So, I mean, the brand shouldn't be paying for content that is actually not compliant with the code, that is going to damage the brand's own reputation. So, I mean, maybe if there's a situation where a very small company who didn't genuinely know and undertakes to do better in the future, that's one scenario. But generally speaking, this is about business. So people who are in business should know the rules of business. You can't say, oh, I'm just small and I'm just new, I don't know the rules of business. The tax man wouldn't accept that. You're expected to inform yourself about the rules that you have to comply with. I don't know, Mark, if you have any additions to that.
No, I think that summarizes it quite well, to be honest. I think, from our perspective, even from your own brand protection perspective, you should be taking an active role in what is said about your brand. If you're engaging with anyone, whether it's an ad agency or a media agency or an influencer or anything else, you control the content that's put out there, and it reflects on your brand. So from that perspective, I think there's a self-interest in doing it. And then, from a legal perspective, you do have the responsibility for what's put out there. So it will be both. And I think sometimes I know there was a few questions about whether we've approached brands, and I referenced the influencer and agency letters that were sent. And it may be when we delve into those a little bit further, or other instances further, that, you see what the process is and what the involvement of the two sides was. And again, that's kind of case by case. But brands cannot kind of wash their hands of it and say, oh, it was out of our control, they just said something.
And I think just to sign off on that, or to latch on to what you've both said, Orla and Mark, it's a commercial endeavor, it's a business case, and it's a professional endeavor. So you would hope that that the agreement would be codified in some way, some sort of contract written down, where there would be a takedown clause if the content produced was deflammatory or didn't abide by the local jurisdiction codes of conduct. So hopefully all of that would be marked up front. But that's why a lot of the work done within influencer marketing is front loaded. It's finding the most appropriate influencer to work with. The creator then has to do their own vetting. Is the brand the right one to work with? That takes a lot of time and therefore money in terms of finding the right sort of connection and then codify it. But once you've done that, it makes sense to work with that brand and that creator over the long form, and that sort of works out as a win for the creator because they know that they've got future revenue coming in. It works out for the brand because often it's a bit cheaper if you do future activations. Sometimes it's a little bit cheaper, and it works out better for the consumer, for the person or the audience. There's lots of evidence that shows they see their favorite creator working with one of their favorite brands and they have really positive sentiment towards that brand even when they're not seeing it on social media. We've got probably time for one or maybe two last questions, and this is something that we're seeing a lot in the UK. I don't know if it's coming on the horizon yet in Ireland, but creators fronting their own businesses, their own endeavours. And we saw that with cases earlier this year in the UK with Grace Beverley, who owns and runs Tala. The ASA in the UK found that she wasn't obviously synonymous with that brand, and so when she posted something on behalf of Tala, she didn't declare it as an ad, and the ASA ruled against her. So here's a question. I'm talking about my own health course in a post that I want people to buy. Do I need to use hashtag or hashtag my own brand?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you're on your social media account where it's not a brand social media account, so it's not the company social media account. And if this is where you post a lot of content, you've organic content, talk about your day and all the rest of it, and then you suddenly pop up and talk about a course or a product that you say, oh, buy this, it's really good. That's an ad. You're promoting you have a commercial interest in the outcome, I suppose, is what it would be. And where you have a commercial interest in the outcome, then it is an ad, and you should be posting that. So hashtag ad, hashtag own brand. You're telling people it's an ad and you're telling them it's your own brand. And it's very clear then to consumers.
Yeah, I'd agree. If I can come in there, just I think if you go back to the principle, I know there's a lot of kind of individual questions that are asked in the Q&A about what to do in specific situations. Go back to the key principle of not misleading the consumer. Is there something here that the consumer needs to know, that there was a reason that you posted this outside of your normal organic content that you may just produce? And that's ultimately what we're getting at, is anything that deviates from that, the consumer needs to be aware of, and that's why the guidance is there. And this didn't just start with the guidance either. This was always in the case of consumer protection law and in the code for the ASA. It's just the guidance is there to assist with that. So yeah, absolutely. As Orla said, hashtag ad, hashtag own brand. And I think one other thing just to add to that as well is sometimes on reposting. So I've seen cases where content creators may repost from their own brand's page, but they don't then declare, or there may be other interactions between brands and the content creator or the influencer, that they don't declare the relationship when they repost. They simply put it up onto their stories or onto whatever it may be on whatever platform. And again, that is, you are reposting, you are advertising from that brand, and that needs to also be declared and needs to be put up with hashtag ad also.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I think one of the things in the guidance note is, if in doubt, label it.
Exactly.
So, say your catch line again, Orla. Pause before you
Pause
post.
before you post.
I'm loving it. I'm loving that. Well, I think time has beaten us. Orla, Toomey, thank you very much. Mark Walsh, thank you very much. A big thank you to Garron Noone. Just a reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and at some point in the near future, it will go up on the ASA's website. But thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you for keeping it moving along at such a lick. Sorry if we couldn't get to all of your questions. Some of them were quite similar, so hopefully we managed to get through most of them. But thank you very much to our speakers today.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mark.
Garron. Thanks, Orla.